The boy showed up at my gate on the coldest night of the year, and he was already dying. I found him in the snow by the fence post, so small the drift had nearly swallowed him. His lips were gray. His little chest fought for every breath. Whoever left him had turned the sled around and gone. I put him inside my coat, against my own skin, and ran him to the fire. 3 winters I kept him alive. I named him Bode, and told him every night that he was mine. He wasn't mine. Last week a rider brought news the whole border already knew. The Alpha King had buried his only son 3 winters ago, and never smiled again. He set a coffin in the ground the same week I pulled a freezing baby out of a snowdrift. And tonight my Bode looked up at the king's own banner nailed above the tavern door, pointed one small finger at the man riding beneath it, and said a word I had never once heard him speak in 3 winters. Papa, the most feared wolf in the north, went still in his saddle. So now I have a choice no mother should have to make. Do I give him back to the man who mourned him, the man who could actually save his life? Or do I run and keep the only thing that was ever, even for a little while, mine? Chapter 1. The songs begin with the king. I begin with the sound Bode made beneath the snow. I heard him before I saw him. Not a cry he was too far gone to cry, just a thin, scraping breath, the sound a bird makes when a cat has already had it. I had gone out only to shut the goat pen against the wind. I nearly walked past him. Then the drift moved. I dug him out with my bare hands. He was tucked in a wool wrap far too fine for anyone on the border close stitching, a dino dye pot in Coldbeck could make. Someone had loved this baby once. Someone had wrapped him with real care, then left him where they prayed he would be found, and driven away into a killing wind. I got him inside and warmed him the slow, careful way my mother had taught me, close against my own body, coaxing the life back into him by inches. His breath stopped once in the night. I gave it back to him, and waited, and it caught again. Near dawn he took one clean breath on his own. Then another. I did not move for fear of ending it. I want to tell you who I was that night, so you understand what he became to me. I was 20, and I was alone, and I was good for exactly one thing. My mother had been the border midwife, and before the fever took her, she had put her whole life into my hands. How to turn a breech lamb. How to bring down a killing heat with cool cloths and willow and patience. How to lay my palm flat on a chest and hear the wet crackle underneath that meant a child had days, not weeks. I was good at keeping other people's children alive. Then I handed them back to their mothers, and I went home to a cold cottage and 6 goats and a bed that had never held anyone but me. That was the shape of my life. A keeper of things that belonged to other people. Temporary. By trade. So I did not let myself love him. Not the first night. I told myself I would find whoever had a claim and hand him back, because handing things back was all I had ever done. When the gray light came, I unwrapped the fine blanket to check him over, and something small and hard slid out of the hem into my lap. A little wolf, carved from pale wood. Somebody had made it by hand, and made it with love. You could see that in the smoothed places where a thumb had gone over and over the same curve. Its right ear was snapped clean off, short, as if a baby had already been at it with new teeth. I thought it was a toy. I set it on the mantel. I did not love him the first night, but by the third, when his fever finally broke and he opened his eyes and looked at me like I was the whole world, the handing back part of me had already lost the argument. I named him Bode. I kept him. And I did not think about that broken-eared wolf again for 3 years. That was my mistake. Not keeping him. Setting the wolf on a shelf. Chapter 2. For 3 winters, the broken-eared wolf meant nothing. Then its owner rode into Coldbeck. I only half heard the news at first. A tax rider stopped at the tavern and said the Alpha King himself was riding the western border, riding it in person, which kings do not do because the law would not let a throne sit empty past 3 years. And the long night was coming, and he had no heir to name. Men said his wolf was black as a burned field. They said grief had turned him to stone the night his queen died of a wasting fever and took their newborn son into the ground with her. They said he had not been seen to smile since. When they spoke his name, they spoke it low, the way you speak of weather that has killed people you know. None of it was mine to worry about. Kings and their griefs happened somewhere east of my life, in a stone place called Heir, and I had cheese to sell. What I noticed was Bode. He was 3 now, and quick, and the healthiest thing you ever saw once he'd survived that first winter. Dark hair. A way of going still and watching a whole room that no other child on the border had. When the rider talked about the king, my boy stopped playing with the goats and listened with his entire small body. And a cold finger touched the back of my neck for no reason I could name. There was one more thing about Bode, and I only understood it later. He knew people by their smell before he knew them by their faces. He always had. He would go rigid when a stranger came to the door, nose working, and then either soften or hide, and he was never wrong about which. Old Win the farrier used to laugh and say the boy had a wolf's nose in a farm boy's body. I thought it was a game. It was not a game. Market day came. I loaded the cart with cheese and Bode rode on top of the wheels of cloth with a fistful of my skirt. And above the tavern door someone had nailed up the king's banner, a black wolf on gray, one paw raised. Bode looked up at it a long time. His nose worked. Then a column of riders came down the market road, unhurried, and the whole street went quiet the way water goes quiet just before it freezes. 40 men in dark iron. At the front rode one who was bigger than the rest, bareheaded in the cold, with a face that had forgotten how to move. My son let go of my skirt. He climbed down off the cart before I could grab him. He didn't run to the king, he stopped a few feet off. And his nose worked again, and I watched something break open in his little face, like recognition, like relief, like a word he had been saving. He pointed one finger straight up at that man and said, clear as a struck bell, a word I had never once heard him speak, not to me, not to anyone, in 3 winters. Papa. The street stopped breathing. I lunged and got a fistful of his coat and hauled him back against me. Too late. The king had already heard. He turned in his saddle, slow, like a man struck somewhere old. His eyes came down the frozen street and found my boy, and then found me holding him, and I watched a face made of stone try to remember how to be a face again. Bring the child here, he said. His voice was quiet. That was worse than any shout. Every part of me that had ever kept a child alive told me to run. Chapter 3. I did not run. There were 40 riders and 1 road, and a woman who runs from a king with a child in her arms is a woman with an arrow in her back before the next fence. So I walked to him instead, which took more. Up close he was younger than the songs made him 30, maybe, and worse than the songs, because the grief was right there on him, like a wound that had been stitched wrong and never healed flat. He swung down off his horse. He stood a head and a half above me. When he lowered himself to one knee to come to Bode's level, the whole street flinched, and I nearly called out to warn him back, the same panic you'd feel watching a child walk up to a strange dog. Bode wasn't afraid at all. Of everything that happened that day, that is the part that undid me first. He walked right up to the most dangerous man in the north and put a small hand flat on the black iron over the king's chest, the exact way he put his hand on my chest at night to feel me breathing. You came, Bode said, like they'd agreed on it long ago. The king made a sound. I have heard a great many sounds a body makes when it is hurt. That was one of them. He caught the boy's hand in his own huge one, so careful like it might break, and he leaned in and I saw his nostrils flare, once, the way Bode's did. Whatever he smelled took the last of the stone out of him. He looked at the boy's face, the dark hair, the shape of the eyes, and he stopped breathing entirely. What is his name, he said. Not to me, to the air. Bode, I said. I called him Bode. He had no name when I found him. When you found him, 3 winters ago. In the snow at my fence, left to die. I lifted my chin, because I was frightened, and lifting my chin is what I do when I am frightened. I've kept him alive since. He's sick right now, his chest. It comes every winter. I was going to spend the cheese money on a real healer today, if you'll let me get on with it. He looked up at me then. Really looked. Not the way a king looks at a subject, the way a drowning man looks at a rope. No one had looked at me like I mattered to the story in a very long time, and I felt it go through me like cold water. "He is sick," the king repeated. "A bad chest. Every winter, since the first." I softened, because a father's face is a father's face even on a wolf. It isn't the dying kind. Not anymore. "I know the difference." "You know the difference," he said, and something moved behind his eyes that I couldn't read yet. A thin man in fine gray had ridden up beside him. Older, neat, with a smile that stopped at his cheeks and never reached anywhere warmer. "Sire," he said, smooth as poured oil, "a border child says a word. Children say all manner of words. We are expected at Heir by the long night, and the succession will not wait while we be quiet, Coke," the king said without looking at him. I had no reason to fear the neat gray man yet. But I watched his smile go flat when the king spoke over him, and I watched his eyes move from Bode's face to mine and do some small, cold sum, and I felt Bode go rigid against me, his nose working, and then bury his face in my neck and go silent. My boy, who was never wrong about people, did not like the smell of that man at all. "You will both come to Heir," the king said, and stood. It was not a question. "The boy needs a healer. You will bring him yourself." "I have goats," I said, which is the single stupidest thing anyone has ever said to a king. For 1/2 of 1 second, the corner of that hard mouth moved. "Bring the goats," he said. Chapter 4. By midnight, my goats were penned inside a royal fortress. My son was burning with fever, and the king's own healers were making him worse. Heir was the biggest thing I had ever seen. We came up to it in the dark, the walls black against a blacker sky, torches guttering in iron cages, and I sat in the back of a king's wagon with a sick child and a crate of complaining goats, and felt exactly as out of place as I was. Servants met us with lamps and did not quite know where to look at the boy, at the goats, at me, a border woman in a wet coat, carried into the heart of the north like something the king had found under a hedge. I heard the first whisper before we were even off the wagon. I would hear a great many more. They gave Bode a room bigger than my whole cottage, with a bed you could have laid 4 children across, and a fire already roaring too hot. Then they nearly killed him in it. The king's physicians came at my boy with silver instruments, and bitter draughts, and a bowl for bleeding, and by the second night his fever climbed instead of breaking. And through it all the neat gray man Coke stood in the doorway, sad-faced, saying softly that border foundlings were so often too weak to save, and perhaps the king should not let himself hope. Perhaps it would be kinder to prepare for grief. I had heard that exact sad speech before, from that exact kind of man, over that exact kind of child. I had learned, the hard way, that some men talk you into grief because grief is useful to them. There was a small burner going in the corner of that room, and the castle's own herb woman stood over it, testing each draught the physicians meant to pour down my boy a drop on the flame to read the color before it ever touched a child, the way the careful ones do. I watched her out of habit, one healer marking another. Most things burned orange or blue. She caught me watching and murmured, "Lo, that the dangerous ones always show their true colors in fire. That no liar's tongue can argue with a flame." My mother used to say the same thing a little meaner, that fire had fewer manners than men, and told the truth faster. I did not think about it again for days. Then I threw them all out. The herb woman, too. I want to be clear about what I did. I, a goat farmer in a borrowed dress, threw the king's physicians out of the king's own castle. "Out," I said, "all of you. You're steaming him and bleeding him, and he needs neither. You're drowning a boy who's already drowning." Out, they looked at the king. The king looked at me for a long, long moment. Then he said, "Do as she says," and the room emptied. And it was only me and Heir and a burning child. I did what my mother taught me. I brought the fever down slow, as she'd shown me 100 times. Never fast and never harsh, and I kept my hand flat on his little chest the whole night, so I would feel the fight in it, and know the very second it changed. The king sat on the other side of the bed, and did not leave, and did not speak. Hours went by. Somewhere past the deepest part of the night, the fever broke. I felt it go under my palm. That sudden give, like a knot slipping loose, and Bode sighed and turned his face into the pillow and fell into a real sleep. A healing sleep. The kind you can hear the safety in. I started to cry. Quietly, so I wouldn't wake him. And across the bed, the Alpha King of the North put his face into his hands, and his shoulders shook, and the man who had not wept since the war wept over a farm foundling's borrowed bed. I buried a box, he said, when he could speak at all. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the boy. 3 winters ago. They told me the fever took him in the night, with his mother, within an hour of each other. They would not let me see him. They said the sickness was still on the bodies, that it was too cruel, that I should remember them living. His jaw worked. So I set a sealed box in the ground beside my wife, and I put a flower on it, and I mourned a box. I never once saw my son's face. Not living, not dead. His hand found the boy's dark hair, so gently it barely touched. I don't know what to hope, he said. Tell me not to hope. You said you know the difference. Could this, I should have said something careful and kind. I said the true thing instead, because he had earned the truth by staying all night. I don't know whose he is, I told him. But I know he's alive, because somebody loved him enough to leave him at the one door on the border where a midwife lived. And I know that's your face he was just making in his sleep. And I know he smelled you in the street, before he ever saw you clearly. He does that. He's always done that. He knows his people by their scent. He knew you, Heir, before his eyes did. The king looked at me like I had put something in his hands that he was terrified to hold, and more terrified to set down. That was the first night. I did not sleep. I sat awake with my hand still on my son's chest, and I understood, with a slow sinking, that I had just begun to give him back one true word at a time. Chapter 5. The days after were the dangerous ones, because I was happy in them. Bode grew stronger fast, the way border children do once the fever is truly out. And Heir, he told me to call him Heir when no one else could hear. Which should have warned me right there. Heir changed in front of me like ice sliding off a pond in spring. He had never once been allowed to be near a child. Kings aren't, so he learned how, badly, right in front of me. And there is nothing on this earth that undoes a woman faster than a huge, frightening man being gentle and getting it wrong. He held Bode like the boy was made of eggs, until Bode laughed at him and grabbed his nose. He learned that a 3-year-old will forgive almost any awkwardness in exchange for a piggyback. He carried my son the whole length of the great hall on his shoulders, while gray-bearded councilmen pretended very hard not to stare, and he looked at me over the noise of it like he needed me to have seen. I fell for him in small pieces. Here are the ones I kept. He found me in the kitchen garden one morning and asked, stiff as a fence post, what a boy Bode's age ought to eat to build strength, and then he took a scrap of parchment out of his own coat and wrote my answer down. The Alpha King of the North, writing down mashed barley and goat's milk, like a recipe he could not afford to lose. We fought about the goats. Heir did not keep goats, he said. Heir was a fortress, not a farm. 2 days later I found a proper pen built against the south wall of the stable, out of the wind, and a note in a hard square hand that said only, for the boy's milk. He never mentioned it. Neither did I. But I stopped being able to breathe quite right around him after that. And then, there was the night I couldn't sleep, and went out to check the goats, and found him already there, in the dark of the stable, sitting on an upturned bucket, humming. I knew the tune. Bode hummed it in his sleep. I had always thought he'd learned it from me, but I had never known it. I stopped in the doorway. That's his song, I said. Bode hums that. Every night. Heir went very still. Selah sang it, he said. My wife. She used to sing it to her belly, before he was even born, to the child that wasn't out yet. He looked down at his own hands. He was days old when they took him from me. He couldn't have learned it from anyone. There was no one left to sing it to him. Babies here before they're born, I said. My mother swore to it, and my mother was never wrong about a birth. He came out of that snowdrift already knowing his mother's song, Hail. He's been humming her to himself for 3 winters and neither of us knew. The king of the north put his head down in the dark of a goat stable. I crossed the floor and did the only thing you can do for a person in that much pain. I put my hand on the back of his neck. He turned into me like something struck. Not grabbing, he never grabbed. He just leaned his forehead against my middle and let me hold his head while his breath came apart. The heat came off him in waves, more than a man's heat, and later I would learn that the wolf runs hot, hotter when it hurts, and that the low sound moving in his chest under my hands was not language and did not need to be. I don't know how to want this, he said into my apron. I buried wanting things. It was easier. I know, I said. My hand was in his hair, and my whole traitor heart was somewhere it had no earthly business being. I do that too. We stayed like that too long. When he finally lifted his head, we were close enough that I could have, that he could have, and the air pulled tight as a held breath, and his eyes dropped to my mouth and mine to his. Then a goat put its head into the bucket and knocked it over with a clatter, and we both jerked back and laughed, wrecked and startled, and the moment broke instead of kissing us. Walking back across the frozen yard afterward, I made myself say it plainly in my own head, because I am not a girl who lies to herself for comfort. You are going to lose them both.
The boy is his, he was always going to be his. And a king does not keep the goat girl who kept his son warm. You know how this ends. You have always known how this ends. So do not let yourself get comfortable in a house you'll be walking out of. Do not. Do not. Forget it again.
Chapter 6. I forgot it again the very next day. That is the truth. I couldn't help it, and it nearly cost us everything, because that was the day I made my one bad mistake. The court did not love me. A border woman sleeping under the same roof as the king, a strange boy calling him Papa the Whispers, followed me down every corridor. So when a kind-faced steward's wife told me, warmly, that the king would be shamed if the boy appeared at council in farm clothes, and that she would take Bode to be measured for proper things, I let her. I wanted him to belong. I wanted, for once, to give him a door into a world, instead of keeping him small and safe and mine. I handed my son to a stranger because I was ashamed of the snow we came from. They were Coke's people. I know that now. The steward's wife walked my boy toward the east stair, toward a side gate and a cart, and it was Bode himself who saved us both, because Bode knows people by their smell. And halfway down the corridor his nose worked, and he went rigid, and he screamed. Not a tantrum. The other kind. The kind that comes out of a child who has smelled a wolf. I came around the corner at a dead run. Hail came from the other end faster. The steward's wife let go of Bode's hand, slipped through a narrow servant's door beside the stair, and had it bolted behind her before either of us reached it. My son threw himself at me and would not stop shaking. Hail did not shout at me. That was almost worse. He crouched and gathered us both against his chest, and I felt the low sound of the wolf going in him, and over the top of my boy's head he said, very quietly, "He is never out of your sight again." Or mine. Do you understand me? Never. I only wanted him to belong, I said, and my voice cracked in half. He belongs, Hail said, because he is loved, not because of what he wears. Don't you ever hand him to this court again to earn a place you already have. They caught the steward's wife before sundown, at the eastern bridge, in a cart already loaded to run. She had a folded paper tucked in her sleeve, sealed with gray wax Coke's own seal. She would not say a word. I wanted him dragged before the whole castle that same hour. That night, I said so. Hail would not do it. A seal is not a confession, he told me. Lo, Coke will swear it was stolen and half my council would believe him over a border woman and a runaway servant. because he has spent 9 years teaching them to. If I move on him now, with only this, he wriggles free, and worse, he learns I know. Then he changes his plan, and the next attempt on my son comes in the dark, where I can't see it, his jaw set. So we lock her away quiet. We let Coke believe she slipped the guard and ran. We let him walk into the long night certain he is still winning. It is the one place his own hand is forced into the light where he must fill the cup himself, in front of everyone. Let him build his own gallows. We'll be there when he steps onto it. I hated it. I understood it. It was the first time I saw that the man could be as patient and as cold as the throne he sat, when the thing he was protecting was worth it. I had spent my whole life being right about children, so that no one could send me away. That was the day I learned that being right was not the same as being safe, and that the man I was falling for would catch me when I was wrong, and not throw me out for it. It undid something in me that had been knotted shut for 20 years, but it also taught me something colder. Coke had not been waiting for the long night. He had already reached for my boy once, in daylight, and missed. He would not miss twice by accident. The bell in the Highmore Tower began counting down the days to the long night that same evening. I lay awake and counted every stroke. Chapter 7. Coke came to me on the 7th day. Alone, smiling. "You've done the crown a great service," he said. He set a purse on the table between us, and it landed heavy. The king is sentimental just now. Grief makes even hard men foolish for a season. But the boy is a border foundling with a winter cough and a lucky face, and when the long night passes and a proper heir is named, this attachment will embarrass everyone, yourself most of all. I looked at the purse. I looked at his neat gray smile. "You're telling me to take the money and go," I said. "I'm telling you it would be a kindness. To the child. To the king. Let him grieve clean and choose an heir of true blood. Take enough to buy a real farm somewhere warm, and let great matters be settled by great people." He leaned in, and his voice dropped into something almost gentle, which was worse. "Girls like you are only ever borrowed, my dear. It's kinder to leave before you're returned." He had reached, without knowing it, straight into the oldest wound I have, and pressed his thumb down on it. "Everything you love gets taken back." I almost took the purse. I did. I sat there with my whole sad history agreeing with him, every word of it, that I was a keeper of other people's children, temporary by nature and by trade, and that I should go now, while it only broke half of me. Then Bode ran in from the next room with the wooden wolf clutched in his fist. I'd sewn it into his things without thinking. Back at the cottage, the one object he'd carried out of his old life. He held it up to Coke to show him off, proud, the way children do. And for one heartbeat, Fair and Coke forgot to hold his face in place. Only for a heartbeat. But I keep dying children breathing for a living. I read faces as easily as that man read purses. I saw him look at that broken-eared wooden wolf and go white to the lips, and I saw him know it. The sick recognition of a man meeting a thing he thought he'd buried 3 winters ago. "Where did the child get that?" Coke said. Very soft. Very careful. "It was in his blanket," I said, "the night I pulled him out of the snow, and I watched him understand that I had just told him far too much, and I watched him make some cold decision behind his eyes. And then the smile went back on, the way a mask goes back over a skull. 'How charming,' he said. He did not take the purse back. He left it, which frightened me more than if he had snatched it away. And he left. I did not sleep that night either. I sat with the little wolf turning over and over in my hands, and I made myself think it through the way I'd think through a hard birth coldly, in order, one thing at a time. Someone had carved it with love. Its ear was snapped, like a baby had chewed it. A fortress had buried a sealed box, and never let the grieving father look inside, and a neat gray man had just gone white as death at a child's toy. The next morning I found a reason to be in the Highmore stillroom, and I read the old physician's herb book cover to cover, with a cold, growing certainty spreading in my chest. I stopped on the page for wolfsbane. Deadly in a drought, it said. Bitter, so bitter, it must be cut with something sweet or almond strong to be swallowed at all. And underlined, in some long dead healer's careful hand, this, it will not lie in fire. Cast on a flame, it burns a low and unmistakable green. I thought about the pale splash scar low on Bode's chest, the one I'd found the first winter and never understood. The one shaped exactly like something spilled. I am a farm girl. But I can add, by dawn the broken-eared wolf was no longer a toy. It was evidence that someone had buried a lie. I went to find Heir. Chapter 8. I found him up on the walls, in the cold, and I put the wolf in his hand without a single word. He knew it before I finished breathing. His whole body changed around it. Selah carved this, he said. His voice had dropped somewhere very low. For him, before he was born. She snapped the ear off herself, laughing, said a perfect toy was a boring toy. Said a real child would break it anyway, so she'd save him the trouble. His hand closed around it until I heard the old wood creak. It went into the coffin. I put it in the blanket with him myself, before they sealed the box. It has been 3 winters in the ground. It was in his wrap, I said, the night he came to me. Heir the coffin was a lie. Somebody switched him. Somebody put a sealed box in the ground and carried the living child all the way to the border, and hid the one thing that could ever prove who he was right there against his skin, where no thief would think to look. He was silent for a long, terrible moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone all the way to the bottom of the war. Marta, he said. The wet nurse. She vanished the same night my wife and son died. We thought she'd run from the sickness. We hunted her for 3 years as a coward and a thief. His eyes came up to mine, and something was waking in them that was more frightening than the stone had ever been. She didn't run from the sickness. She ran with him. From whoever made the sickness. Marta, I said slowly. The name pulled something loose in me. Say the rest of it. When did she vanish, exactly, and which way did they think she ran? East, he said. The trackers swore east, toward the coast. We hunted the eastern roads for a year and found nothing. East, I shook my head. She sent them east. Bode came to me from the west, off the mountain road. Hail, there's a grave under the chapel wall at Coldbeck, a woman. Found frozen a week after I pulled Bode from the snow, miles up the pass. Not my birth to attend, and not my body to lay out the chapel women buried her. A stranger with no name. And Father Ost wrote her into the burial ledger, the way he writes them all, and sealed the book. I never had cause to open it. Why would I? A nameless traveler dies in the mountains most winters. I heard my own voice go thin. Then the woman in that ledger isn't nameless. She's Marta. She got your son to my door, and then walked herself up the pass to die, where no tracker could ever use her body to find him. Heir closed his eyes. Tomorrow I'll ride to Coldbeck myself, and open that book, he said, very low. She will have a name. And a stone, and Bode will know what she spent to keep him breathing, as long as he lives. Then he opened his eyes, and they were harder. There's more, isn't there? On your face. Tell me the rest. There's more, I said, and I made myself keep going. Coke went white when he saw the toy. He offered me a purse to take Bode far away before the long night before an heir gets named. Of course he did. Heir's jaw was iron. He killed Selah and thought he'd killed my heir with her, to leave me nothing to name. The law is plain, a king with no blood heir by the 3rd long night must take one from the council's own sons, with a regent behind the child until he's grown. Coke has a grandson on that list. 6 years old. His mouth twisted. He never wanted my crown for himself. He wanted it in a cradle he owned, with 12 years of regency to make himself untouchable. Bode alive unmakes all of it. And the poison that killed your queen, The one Bode carries a scar from. I found it in the herb book. Wolfsbane. Cut with something almond sweet. It burns green in a flame, hail, it cannot hide in fire. Whatever else happens, that is the one thing that can't lie. And the Alpha King of the North, who had been stoned for 3 winters, came all the way back to life in front of me. It was a magnificent and terrible thing to watch. It was also, for about a minute, aimed at exactly the wrong people, because grief does ugly things on its way back out of a man, and he turned all that new terror on the nearest things he loved. Us, you have to go, he said suddenly, and his hands came up and gripped my arms. Both of you. Tonight, if Coke poisoned my wife and my son in his cradle and hunted the nurse to the edge of the world, he will not stop at a farm girl and a boy who can undo him. I'll send you north, with men I trust to the bone, somewhere he can't reach until you're sending us away. My voice went flat and cold. You just found your son, and your very first answer is to hide him on a farm in the dark. Again, to keep him alive, to keep him where you don't have to risk him, where you don't have to feel it if you fail. I pulled out of his hands. I know that flinch, Hele Vesk. I invented that flinch. I have kept that child breathing through 3 winters of fever with these 2 hands and no help from anyone alive, and you will not pack me off like a purse of borrowed money because you are afraid. If we run, Coke wins clean, and Bode spends his whole life as a hunted secret, always looking at the door. We finish it. At the long night. In front of the whole north, where a coward can't do it in the dark. He stared at me as if I'd struck him across the face. You could die, he said. So could he. So could you. I made myself say the last of it, because it was true and he needed to hear that I already knew it. I know I lose him at the end of this. He's yours, he was always going to be yours, and that's how it should be. But I will not lose him to a coward's plan. Not Coke's. And not yours. For a long moment the only sound was the wind on the stone. Then he closed his hand around the wooden wolf, and he nodded, once, and the flinch went out of him and something harder and better took its place. The long night, he said. 2 days. The whole north gathers in the great hall to watch me drink the oath cup and name my heir before the pack and before Celine. His mouth twisted, and Coke is master of the table. He prepares the cup with his own hands. He has done it for 9 years. Then he'll poison it, I said. It's the one night no one can stop him, you have to drink it in front of everyone. It is worse than that. Hale's voice was flat. The oath cup is sacred to Celine. Once the master of the table fills it, not one drop may touch earth or water or fire before the king has drunk. To spill it is treason against the moon herself. The pack would turn on the man who did it. That is why he can use anything he likes. He knows I cannot pour it out to test it without damning myself in front of the whole north. He has built a cage out of my own holy law. He looked at the wooden wolf in his hand. He never once imagined a border midwife who'd bring her own proof and dare me to break it. Then who decides? I asked. If you spill it, who says whether the moon forgives you or damns you? The moon priest. He stands beside the cup every long night. Only he can rule whether a broken oath stays sacred or not. Hale's mouth was grim. He is older than the walls, and in 40 years I have never once heard him excuse a spilled cup. If I do this, Merra, I am wagering my crown on a hard old man seeing the truth faster than the law. He turned the little wolf over in his fingers. I find I am willing to wager it. I felt the cold understanding land in both of us at the same moment. The long night was the one night Coke could not act in the dark. It was also the one night he could put anything he liked into a single ceremonial cup and hand it, smiling, to the king. Chapter 9. I have never in my life been as afraid as I was walking into that hall. It was all torchlight and black banners and the low roar of 1,000 voices, and at the center, on a stand of gray moon metal, the great oath cup waited. 1,000 pairs of wolf-bright eyes. And me, in a borrowed gray dress, holding a 3-year-old who kept twisting around to see the fires. Hale stood at the front in the king's iron. Coke stood at his right hand, as master of the table, as he had every year. Of course he did. I had one job and my mother had spent her whole life training me for it, without either of us ever knowing. Because here is the thing they had all forgotten about Bode. Two things, really. The first was the scar, a pale, flat mark low on his chest, shaped exactly like something splashed. I had found it the first winter, and never once understood it until Coke went white at a toy, until I knew what had truly happened in that nursery. It was a burn. Concentrated wolfsbane blisters living skin before it ever stops a heart, the herb book said so. Underlined twice, and this was a splash of it. Meant to go down a newborn's throat, knocked aside at the last second and searing his chest as it went. Marta, saving him with the only heartbeat she had left to spend. And I could name what had made it. Not by smell, a scar keeps no smell after 3 winters, whatever the songs say. I knew because I had kept the fine wool wrap he came in, folded in my chest all these years, and there was a dark stain baked into the hem that I had scrubbed at once and never lifted. 2 nights ago, after the herb book, I cut 2 darkened threads from that stain. One I tested over the still-room flame, alone, the way the castle's herb woman had taught me without meaning to. It burned a low, sick green, not the orange of an honest fire, not the blue of the hot heart of one. Wolfsbane, cut with almond, 3 winters old and still unable to lie in a flame. The second thread I had folded, untouched, inside my sleeve, and I meant to use it where the whole north could watch. The second thing I did not know until that night in the hall, Heir carried it, and he had carried it alone for 3 winters. When he had first knelt in the market street and leaned close to Bode, he hadn't only caught his own blood in the boy's scent. He'd seen, at the collar, the edge of that same splash scar, and he had gone rigid, because he had held his son the 1 hour he was allowed, and he had memorized every part of him, and low on that small chest, half hidden now under the burn, was a small pale birthmark shaped like a wolf's paw pad, 1 round pad and 4 little toes above it. The poison had splashed across the edge of it and scarred it, but it had not erased it. Under the burn, if you knew exactly where to look, the mark his own eyes had counted the night his son first breathed was still there, toe by toe. A toy can be stolen, a scar can be argued, but a father knows the mark he saw on his own child the hour it was born. So when Coke lifted the oath cup, and turned, and carried it toward the king with his neat gray smile, I was already moving. "Don't drink it," I said, loud, into the single biggest silence of my life. The hall turned on me like one enormous animal. Coke laughed first, easy and warm, and I felt the whole room start to tip his way. "The border woman," he said to the court, fondly, sadly, "Sire, forgive her grief and ambition have turned a simple girl's head. She has coached this foundling to say a word, and now dreams of a crown." He spread his hands. "I feared this. I have proof of it. This is the toy she claims fell from heaven," and he produced, from his own gray sleeve, a scrap of parchment, a ledger page commissioned 4 days ago from a Highmore carver, the very week she arrived, paid from the purse this court issued for the sick child's care. "She did not find a lost prince, my lords. She has spent 4 days building one, and now, before we let a peasant's ambition rewrite the succession, let the king drink his oath and name a true heir of proven blood, as the law demands tonight, before the long night ends." It was a good lie. It was a very good lie. I felt the court believe it. I felt even a few of them look at me with pity, poor mad farm girl, and I understood that he had planned for the toy, that he had a forged answer ready for every clean piece of proof I had, and that if I stood on the toy alone I would lose, and Bode would lose, tonight, forever, so I did not stand on the toy. "Then don't prove it with the toy," I said. "Prove it with him before I bear him. Your Grace, you held your son the 1 hour you were given." Coke couldn't forge what's under this shirt because Coke never saw it. So say it first. In front of every witness here, with the boy's shirt still closed, tell them what mark you saw on your son's chest the hour he was born, and where. The hall went utterly silent. Coke's smile finally faltered, because he understood, a half-second too late. What I had just done, I had made the king describe the proof before anyone could see it to copy. Heir did not hesitate. Low on the chest, under the left, he said, clear enough to carry to the doors. A small mark like a wolf's paw pad, 1 round pad and 4 small toes above it. I counted them myself the hour he drew breath. I have counted them in my sleep every night since. Only then did I turn Bode in my arms and draw his collar down and bear the splash scar to the torchlight. And there, under the burn, exactly where the king had said, exactly the shape the king had named to a hall full of witnesses, before a single soul could see it to copy it, 1 round pad and 4 small toes. The room made a sound like a wave pulling back, but Coke was not finished, because men like Coke are never finished while there is 1 card left. Sentiment, he said, sharp now, the warmth gone. Any splash scar can be shaped to look like a paw print by a clever girl with 3 winters and a needle. A grieving father sees his son in every stray. The law requires more than a father's tears and a healer's needlework. It requires this, I said. I took the darkened thread from my sleeve, the one I'd cut from Bode's blanket. The blanket he'd been wrapped in the night he was left to die, and I held it into the nearest torch, where the whole hall could see. It caught, and it burned that same low green, the green nobody in the north could mistake. Wolfsbane, I said, into the gasp that ran through the room. Cut with almond. Baked into the wrap your true heir was carried away in, 3 winters ago, the same night your queen died of a wasting fever nobody was allowed to see. That is not needlework, my lords. That is the poison that emptied a nursery. I turned and looked straight at Coke, and I would wager my life it is the very same thing sitting in that sacred cup right now, waiting for a king who is forbidden by his own holy law to pour it out and check. The hall went dead silent, because they all knew the law. The oath cup could not be spilled. To spill it before the king drank was treason against Selene herself. Heir looked at the cup. Then he looked at his son in my arms, and the Alpha King of the North committed treason against the moon in front of his entire people. He took the sacred cup off its stand, and he tipped a slow stream of it out across the flagstones and into a fallen, guttering torch. The hall cried out, half of them in horror at the sacrilege, half already knowing why he'd done it. The wine hit the flame and roared up green, the very same green, twinned exactly with the thread still smoking in my own hand. So every soul in that hall saw the 2 poisons answer each other. Let Selene judge me for the cup, Heir said, into the uproar, and his voice cut it silent. I will answer to her gladly, for I have just poured out my own murder. Master of the table, you filled this cup with your own hands. If I have wronged the moon, then the fault is yours to share. Drink what's left of your oath, and prove us both liars. Coke did not drink. He ran instead. He got perhaps 4 steps. The pack keeps its own justice on the long night, before Selene, and I will not tell you the shape of it, except that the king never had to raise his hand, that it was over quickly, and that Farron Coke's neat grey smile did not save him at the end any more than it had saved a queen and a newborn 3 winters before. Then it was quiet. And it was done. But there was still the matter of the spilled cup, and I saw the fear of it move through the hall a king who had defiled Selene's oath, whatever his reason. Every eye went to the one man who could name what the law meant, the old moon priest, older than the walls, who in 40 years had never excused a spilled cup. He crossed slowly to the green stain on the flagstones. He lowered the silver end of his staff into it and watched the metal smoke, and his face went hard as a shut door. Hear me, he said, and his thin voice carried to the doors. The cup was defiled before it ever reached the king's hand. A poisoned oath is no oath, it is a murder dressed in holy cloth. And the moon does not count the breaking of a murderer's cup as sin. He lifted his staff toward Heir. The king spilled nothing sacred tonight. He spilled the crime. Selene is not offended. She is answered. The breath went out of the whole hall at once. Whatever Heir had risked, the law had just handed it back to him. Heir Vesk turned to the whole gathered north, with his son's proof scar still bared to the torchlight, and his voice ringing out like a bell across a battlefield. 3 winters ago, he said, I buried a lie, and I mourned it, and I let a murderer stand at my right hand. This is my son, Bode, of the line of Vesk, heir to the north alive tonight, not because of my crown, and not because of my healers, but because a border midwife's daughter pulled a dying child out of a snowdrift and asked nothing in return, and kept him breathing through 3 winters with her own 2 hands. He found me in the crowd, and held me there with his eyes. She is the mother who raised him, and no crown and no court will ever take that name from her. Kneel to my son if you love me, but kneel to her first. And the whole hall knelt. I stood there with my heart breaking and mending in the very same breath. Because I had done it, I had kept my promise. I had saved him a second time, and because I understood, kneeling wolves and all, that I had also just handed him over, in front of the entire world. Forever, he was the heir of the North now. And I was the goat girl, and the goat girl could go home. I got Bode settled and sleeping. I did not cry where anyone could see, and near dawn I put on my old coat to walk back to the life that was mine. Hale caught me at the gate. Epilogue. You're leaving, he said. He's safe. He's yours. He's proven. That was the whole of it. I kept my chin up. It's what I do. Everything I love gets taken back, Hale. I've known that about myself since I was younger than Bode. Better to walk out on my own feet than be walked out on. Let me go while it's still clean. He didn't step toward me. That is the part I still think about. He stood 3 feet off in the cold, with his hands open and empty at his sides, and he left me the whole road behind me, and he said, You are not borrowed. I stopped. That's the lie you carry. I heard it the first day, in the way you said I have goats, like you already had 1 foot out the door. Somebody taught you, young, that you were only ever a keeper of other people's things. Temporary, his voice broke, and he let it break, in front of the walls and the dawn. You kept my son alive with your own body in a snowdrift. You threw my physicians out of my own castle. You walked into a hall full of wolves and dared a murderer to drink his own poison. Merra, there is nothing temporary about you. You are the most permanent thing that has ever happened to me. You're the Alpha King, I whispered. You have to name a Luna the North. Will I already know the name I'll say? He took 1 step. Only 1. Then he stopped and left the whole rest of the distance to me, the way you leave the last of anything to the person it truly belongs to. But it has always been your choice. From the snow, it has always been your choice. Stay, because you want him. Stay because you want me. Or go and I will not follow. And I will raise my son knowing exactly who his mother was, and what she gave up so he could be safe. He held out 1 huge hand, palm up, open, not reaching, only offered. But I am asking you to stay. Not to keep him. To keep us. I looked at that open hand. I thought about my mother's cold bed, and every child I had ever handed back, and the purse Coke had left on my table. I thought about a man on an upturned bucket in a dark stable, humming a song a baby had heard before he was even born. And I thought, this one is not being taken back. This one, for once in my whole life, gets to be mine, because I am the one who chooses it. I put my hand in his. He drew me in slow, giving me every inch of the way to change my mind, and I didn't, and he bent his head and rested his forehead against mine first, the way he'd leaned into me in the stable that night, breathing me in. I felt the heat come off him, more than a man's heat. Then, he kissed me. Once, careful, like I was something he had waited 3 winters to be allowed. A low sound moved in his chest, and his hand curved warm against my jaw, and for the length of that 1 kiss I was not temporary anywhere in the world. When we broke apart, I was laughing and crying at the same time, and so, very nearly, was the King of the North. Behind us a small voice said, "Papa, is Mama staying?" Because, of course, he was awake. He was always awake when it mattered most. Heir's whole face came apart into something I had never once seen a king wear. He crouched, and he lifted our boy up onto one arm, and he tucked me in under the other, and against the grey dawn coming up slow over Highmoor, he said the truest thing I have ever heard a frightened man say out loud. Yes, he told his son. Mama's staying. Mama was always the one who stayed. The morning after the long night, Heir ordered the sealed coffin lifted from the ground beside Selah. I stood beside him when they opened it. There was no child inside. Only a bundle of wool, weighted with smooth river stones, a false grave a murderer had built, so a king would kneel at a lie for 3 winters, while the true heir grew up a kingdom away on goat's milk. Heir looked at the stones for a long time. Then he closed the box gently and had it buried again, empty, because Selah should not lie alone. Coke's grandson, it turned out, had known nothing of any of it, a small boy raised as a pawn by a grandfather he thought loved him. Heir sent him home to his mother and quietly struck his name from the succession rolls. Whatever Coke had built around that child, the child himself was innocent of it, and Heir would not make an orphan pay for a murderer's ambition. We rode to Coldbeck together that same week, and opened the chapel ledger, and found the nameless line. Marta has a stone now, with her name cut deep, in the good ground by the chapel wall where the sun reaches first. Bode leaves a carved thing on it every time we pass, usually a wolf. He always breaks one ear off first. He says a perfect one is boring. He has no memory of why he knows to do that, and I have never had the heart to tell him it was his mother's joke before it was his. Heir still hums in the dark sometimes. Badly, but now he leaves the door open when he does it because neither of us is waiting to be abandoned anymore, and there is nothing left in this house that has to be buried. So tell me honestly, back at the very start, before Merra knew whether the Alpha King could be trusted at all, would you have handed him the child you'd raised for 3 winters? Or would you have taken your boy and run into the snow rather than risk it? Tell me down in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one warmed you up on a cold night, stay close by the fire. There's always another story waiting here at Velvet Story House. Sleep sweet.